Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. That the NT government ensures its investment in healthcare meets current and future projected needs of all Territorians. Now, that is indeed a matter of public importance, and I welcome the opposition raising it. But there is something of a perverse irony that the Labor opposition would raise it, noting their chronic lack of investment in the healthcare system over large tracts of time. Now, I can only imagine that they've raised it today serendipitously, hoping to capitalise on the federal election, federal budget, and announcements that may paper over their negligent conduct in this area. Because investment is about more than just buildings. Investment is also about people. And that is where the last 8 years of Labor governance was abysmal in this place. Now, I specifically want to talk to you about durable healthcare workforce, and I've raised it before in other forms, and I'm astonished, as I say, that this would be the item that the opposition would choose to draw attention to, because as the Minister for Health pointed out, we're working aggressively and at pace in this space to do all manner of things that they dropped the ball on over a long period of time. Now, I'm not ordinarily predisposed to playing kick the last lot for the last 8 years, but this really is taking the prize today. In the relentless pursuit for financial capital over the last 8 years, the Labor government dropped the ball on human capital, and I have raised this point before. And in the Treasurer's annual financial report, in the TAFA that came out late last year, if you look carefully, you'll see that health is the government's largest sector, the government sector's largest expenditure category, and it's ideally illustrative of the Labor government's mismanagement. And the TAFA reiterates, as did the Minister for Health earlier, that there has been a, quote, increased expenditure in relation to hospital services, largely driven by skilled workforce shortages requiring an increased utilisation of high-cost agency labour hire and overtime. Now, why has that happened? Why is it that our system is bankrupting itself, having to rely on a two-tier system where we're paying differential rates and having to rely on agency workforce to keep the system from collapsing? It's because of poor economic policy choices that have been made over a period of time. And while I applaud the federal Labor government for kicking in from time to time in our healthcare arena, and likewise federal Liberal governments, there is very little that Territory Labor can really lay credit to over the last 8 years in that regard. We have facilities that are underserviced with inadequate workforce to be able to provide high-quality healthcare. And it is a disincentive now for people setting up shop in the Northern Territory and sticking around in the Northern Territory. And that's the point that the Minister for Health made. And we are working on these issues holistically. Yes, there is a component that is about buildings and plant and capital. But there is also a component that is about making this place livable, making it safe for healthcare workforce, and not just attracting them, but finding ways to retain them. I am really astonished in this regard. The quantum of that utilisation of high-cost agency labour hire and overtime was, quote unquote, health spending increased by $228 million from $2.02 billion in 2023-24 to $2.24 billion in 2023-24 as a result of increased expenditure in hospitals, largely driven by skilled workforce shortages, requiring increased utilisation of high-cost labour, agency labour hire and overtime. It's really astonishing that they would draw attention to this area of policy ineptitude. Successive Territory Labor Treasurers and successive Territory Labor Health Ministers have neglected this issue because, quite frankly, it was in the too hard basket. Not for this government. Not for this government. This is not in the too hard basket for this government. You will note that where they refuse to talk about population decline, we have tackled it from day one. And it is just the beginning in this regard, because at the moment, what are we doing? At the moment, we are trying to stimulate the residential construction sector, we're trying to stimulate housing supply, we're trying to incentivise small business to spend money. There's all of these things that are working in tandem, in concert, to try and create the preconditions for a place that people want to stick around in. Because right now, it's not just us that has a healthcare shortage. There is a global shortage of healthcare workers, as the Deputy Opposition Leader pointed out. And in order to be competitive in that marketplace, you have to provide a reasonable offering. And so we are trying very hard to set the preconditions to make it possible for people to want to come here, stay here, and succeed here. Because right now that is simply not the case. Now, I'm committed to working with the Minister for International Students, Migration and Population, and the Minister for Health on creating sustainable new workforce pipelines in healthcare. And why do I say new? I say new because we have had so many misstarts in this place, so many false alarms, so many red herrings and utopia-esque announcements that it's embarrassing. You can go back to September 2023 to find the last lot of pseudo-engagement done by the then Deputy Chief Minister on a mercy mission to India, to Kerala, to try and set up new workforce pipelines with nurses purportedly and create aviation sector options. Where are those nurses? What have we got to show for that MOU from Kerala? Seriously, what have we got to show for it? It is astonishing that you would bring this up. Of all things, I mean, I probably will give you a fairer hearing than anyone. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I will give the Labor opposition a fairer hearing than anyone in this place. And there are things they could point to that they've done successfully. Why not talk about them? No, in actual fact, perhaps they're being extremely brave in highlighting just how negligent they've been in the policy arena in relation to workforce development over such a long period of time. I mean, I'm not even inclined to speak on matters of public importance, but this one is actually so important that I could not speak on it. I'm committed, as I say, to working with the Minister for International Students, Migration and Population and the Minister for Health on creating sustainable new workforce pipelines. And where they have failed to do anything other than make utopia-esque announcements, we will actually deliver. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean there aren't things happening in the background in a whole range of areas. And yes, the headline-grabbing material is all about deregulating our environment, all about trying to create business confidence, and I'm the first to admit that it's an aggressive agenda that the government is pushing in that regard. But it's not the only part of the agenda that we're pushing. There is a threefold agenda to try and reduce crime, to try and rebuild the economy, and try to restore lifestyle. Now, under those, lots of different things are happening in every regard. And whether they all work perfectly or at the same time remains to be seen. But quite seriously, after years of negligence on workforce, population, talent acquisition, migration, higher education, what has the former government got to stand on in this regard? Well, they really have dropped the ball entirely on the Labor, again spelt the right way, Labor component of the Labor equation. Seriously, to be this fixated over this period of time on major projects and infrastructure and, it astonishes me. The fact is that the underlying problem here is demographic decline, and I've spoken about this at length, so I'm not going to go through it again. But the key thing to remember here is that demographic decline has workforce implications. Good luck servicing any industry if you don't have people. And that's why we're working on trying to bring those people here and trying to create the preconditions for people to want to come here, stay here, live here, work here. And healthcare workforce are a really important part of that equation. Now, our demographic decline has undermined, not fostered economic development, and it's had an attendant impact on the quality of life for all Territorians. And it's diminished it, not improved it. And demographic decline is at the root. It is at the root of the workforce crisis in healthcare. And be clear, that's exactly what it is, a workforce crisis in healthcare. Now, I want to be very careful about what I say here, because I know the people that work in our healthcare system are working to their, as hard as they possibly can to provide the best quality of care that they possibly can. But they are working with the policy odds stacked against them, and they have been for a number of years now. And it is serendipitous that just yesterday, one of my constituents, a gentleman I know named Simon Grumbauer, wrote a letter in desperation to the NT Independent. And I want to highlight this letter today because it speaks volumes about the situation we're in right now. The letter is entitled "Stroke Victim Left in Limbo at RDH with No Rehab Services." Now, I've been trying to help Simon Grumbauer to the best of my ability because his wife Elva recently had a stroke and she's received care at RDH and she's been redirected to palliative care. And it's Simon's contention that she should have the option for rehabilitative care. Now, I know that the people that work in RDH are doing their darndest to provide the best possible service they can, but the contention made by my constituent is this, quote unquote, "It seems that RDH does not have the expertise or staff to deal with any but the mildest form of stroke and therefore send the rest of us to die regardless of age." Now that's a harsh charge, but what I will say is this, RDH doesn't have facilities for mechanical thrombectomy, RDH doesn't have specialist stroke physicians, RDH has limited neurologists, and those that are there work overtime and flat out to try and keep up with the demand, and they are not to be pilloried for their service, they are to be lauded for their service. But the people who are to be pilloried for their negligence are the former government, who didn't do anything to incentivise those specialists coming and staying in the Northern Territory, who didn't have transitional mechanisms in place to fill the gaps when we lost critical specialists and weren't able to get people to fill that gap. I feel for Simon because there's very little that I can do for him or for his wife Elva at this point, short of advocate for him and his wife to be able to get access to the rehabilitative care that they are seeking at Palmerston Hospital. And that's a medical decision, and that will be made by the medical specialists. But, you know, stroke is a perfect illustration of something where you require people with high-end skills, and you require them not after the fact, but at the time of the incidence and the onset of the occasion. I really do struggle to see why, you know, we would be discussing this today, except, as I say, because it's worth shining a light on, and perhaps that's what we take from today. But I think when all is said and done, you know, Labor's commitment to facing the NT's economic reality, which is a quagmire of catastrophe made of their own creation, is something that we're just starting to have to accept. Our government will make lots of noises about negligent conduct, economic mismanagement going forth. But people's lives are at stake here. They're at stake in the bush, they're at stake in urban areas. This really does matter. You know, all browbeating aside, all of us want for a better, stronger, robust healthcare system. I grew up in this place at a time when investment in public health, public housing, public education and public infrastructure was sufficiently strong that we provided the preconditions for people to succeed. And successive governments over a number of years now have dropped the ball, and that process really accelerated over the last 8 years when we stopped paying attention to sustainable demographic growth to underpin sustainable economic growth. Now, I make the case frequently on the government side with my colleagues that it's great that you've got these industries that you want to concentrate on, but we're going to need people to fill all of them. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make this place a place where people across those sectors will want to reside here, live here, work here and enduringly stay here, but also people in critical areas like healthcare will want to do the same. When you're talking about investment, remember, investment isn't just about plant and capital and bricks and mortar. It's not just about buildings and hospitals. It's not just about bricks and mortar. It's about people. And I share, you know, we all share concern for the state of our healthcare system. And so again, it's one of these things where I think we need to band together now and face the reality of the situation so that we can move forward constructively. Because unless and until we do accept that we have a population and workforce problem, unless we can find some sort of bipartisan consensus on moving forward on that agenda, for accepting that both sides dropped the ball on this over a number of years, and now we need to figure out how to not just attract, but retain and develop populations, the Northern Territory is going to be at a crossroads. Our economic development is not the only thing that's at stake here. It's our existence and our capacity to exist rather than just subsist within this jurisdiction. We cannot continue to joke about when in pain, get on a plane. You know, those days are done now. We know that there are critical issues in the healthcare sector and it is time for us to face them head on. And I commend the Minister for Health for facing those challenges and investing in our system appropriately going into the future. Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Fong Lim.